Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am your host, Brooke Walker, and if you're new here, this is my story about being raised in a religious cult. We were in it for probably more than 25 years, from the age of 8 when my parents joined it. It was a church run by a woman who was a trance medium. So she spoke a spirit, so she channeled a spirit. And then it included quite a few different things. So there was a lot of emotional abuse. There was a lot of alcoholism. There was arranged marriages. And so this is my story, sharing it with you in hopes that in sharing something that's usually very shameful for people, I'm hoping to take some of the stigma away, help you to have a better understanding in case you've been a part of emotional abuse from a religious group, so that people can understand better and so that they can heal. And in this, I talk about my healing experience and some of the things that I've done in hopes that it might benefit others. And some people just like to hear the story, and if you're here for that, that's fine too. So, last episode, I got a little emotional, which I'm going to talk about at the end of today, because I want to kind of tell a little bit more about what I do when I get into those states so that I can hopefully help other people, because I understand that we are like an onion. We're unwrapping layer after layer, and healing is one of those things as well. So we're going to talk a little bit today about ways to move through those layers of healing as you go through them. Last week I talked about my wedding, and I talked about my baby shower. So this week we're going to talk about when I had my son and that experience. I also want to talk about something that I call the iceberg theory. So it's kind of 80-20, and it's about implicit and explicit messages that we receive. And we'll dive into that. And that's what we're in for today. So welcome. So I'm going to start today talking about implicit and explicit messages that we receive, and how that applies to like 80-20 theory. So 80-20 theory is used in a lot of different things, but very simply, it's the iceberg theory. And the iceberg theory is that, if you have an iceberg, you have that 20% that is above the surface, right? That 20% that's above the surface is what we can see, it's what we can feel, it's what we can touch, it's that tangible. And then under the surface is actually the other 80%, which is huge. So the 80% would be things that are implicit, that we can't see, we can't touch, but we know that they're there, right? So in any environment, there are the things that we are told, but then there are the things that we are not told, that we have an understanding about, even if they were never explicitly explained. So explicit meaning that, at one time somebody said, do this or don't do this. So for example, being raised in the cult that I was raised in, nobody ever said if you left, you were going to be ostracized. However, it was known that that was going to happen because we saw it happen to people. If you left, nobody ever talked to you again. And there was a story made up about who that person was when they left. And it was typically always negative. And a lot of times it was like they couldn't cut it. They weren't worth the spiritual sauce, I guess, is a term I'm making up right now. So explicit is those things that we can taste, touch, hear, all of that. Implicit are the underlying things. 80% of the underlying things are the way that we learn and the understandings that we get from a situation, regardless of what we have been told. And so one of the things that gets so confusing in cult environments is we learn all these things based on what happens to other people, regardless of what we've been told. And there's so much religious abuse that happens in these messages that are not explicitly said, or the way things are inferred, right? It's like knowing your parents are fighting, even though you didn't see them get into an actual argument, because the way that they're being cold towards each other, right? So that would be things that you pick up, because we pick up things all the time by body language, by the way somebody's tone is. There's a lot of way to pick up messages that are not just based on the words that come out of our mouth. So, and this happens all the time with people in general, but in a cult and a religious environment, it's harder to explain. And so I actually want to explain that there's a reason you can't always put your finger on something. And it's because there's implicit messages, implied things that come across and that you learn and understand, even though you're not really sure where it came from. Okay? Starting off there today. Okay. So last week I talked about my wedding. My wedding was on the 4th of July. My baby shower was about a week later. My due date was July 21st. And it's first baby, you never know when you're actually going to come. So now, some things I also want to explain about growing up in the church. There were 2 midwives, like state licensed midwives. One of them, her name was Debbie, and then the other one was my mom, Kathy. And there was always an expectation that you would do your best to have a baby at home with one of the midwives. And then there was midwives in training, different people who were training under them and would go to births and learn so that they could become midwives and help deliver babies. And I don't remember it specifically said, although it could have happened and I wasn't attending it, but it was felt that if you did not have a baby at home, then you were less of a woman. I had the understanding if I did not choose to have my baby at home, and there was sometimes people would say, it was like, well, no, that's okay. I mean, babies come however babies come. But the other thing is that it was also an expense. And like I shared, we were poor as shit. And so there was this expectation about when and how you had your babies. So my birth was planned. My birth was planned to have, not at my house because I lived outside of Payson, which wasn't close enough to a reliable source. God forbid something went wrong. Or if there was any need to get to somewhere. So I had my son planned to have down in Mesa, which was a couple miles away from the closest hospital. Maybe even a mile. It was literally around the corner. So, and then there was everybody who was chosen to be there when I went into labor, which again, if you listen to last episode, I did not pick those people. It was not my choice who was going to be at my birth. I did not get to choose that. So, and there was always comparisons to other people's births too. Like Megan, my older sister, she had had her first baby at home at 16. So, of course, me at 18 or 19 should be able to do this, right? So I go into labor. Um, and everything was moving along. I was beginning to have contractions and stuff like that. And I don't even remember if we went to the valley knowing I was going to go into labor soon or if I was already down there. I don't remember being in a car having contractions, but could have gone either way. Um, my mom was never good at helping deliver her own children's children. So she always, she was a great midwife until her kids were in labor. And then she fell apart. She literally fell to pieces. So she was, of course, there because she was my mom. And then Debbie was there. And then a bunch of other women were there. I couldn't name them all because I don't remember exactly who everybody was, just because it's been too long. My sister Megan was there, and everything was progressing very normally. Having a lot of contractions, definitely a normal labor. They were very consistent, moving along. They checked me. I think I was 3 centimeters, but I was in active labor. So I wasn't very far. I hadn't progressed very far, but I was in active labor. So my contractions were every 6 minutes, and they started, I believe, the night of the 21st. So as it's progressing, the first night I'm up all night, completely up all night. And my sister Megan is the only one who is up with me. And she is holding my back, rubbing my back, talking me through it, helping me breathe. And I mean, all night long, as a very normal first birth would be. Walking around, breathing through it, holding on to things. I was not in bed very much because I was very uncomfortable being in bed. So by the next day, I've gotten very little sleep. I'm very tired, and I'm getting worried. And, first baby, surprised how much it hurt and how uncomfortable it was. So they all decide to make plans. My mom and Debbie, Marlo, I think, and different people all start making plans. And then they asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital. And I said at that time that I did. And so I've been in labor for my waters hadn't broken, but I've been in labor pretty solid for 24 hours, and I am really tired. My biggest problem is that I couldn't get any sleep. So they make all these executive decisions without me really asking, other than whether or not I actually want to go to the hospital. And one of them being sending my sister home. So now she just gets sent up north. And there was this very constant thing that got put between me and my sister's relationship that never really made sense. It was like comparison, and then it was like this they in processes they always talked about, if something happened with me, it was like, oh, you're in competition with your sister. Or if something happened with Megan, it was like, oh, you're in competition with your sister. Usually me with her because I was younger. And so they just decided that she must be in the way of me having this baby, which was absolutely not true. She was the only one who stayed up with me all night. She was the only one holding me, helping me. Like, she was the only one I felt like was really there. Because my mom, again, like, it's not her strong point. When it comes to her own daughters. Everybody else, phenomenal midwife. But when it comes to her own daughters, she was not there. So I was really upset that she got sent home. So then I'm at the hospital, and it's me. I remember my friend, Allie, had come, which is Debbie's daughter. Debbie was there. My mom, Colin, was there. And I think that's about it. And Not that you need to have a lot of people there at the hospital. Pretty much everybody had decided to go home, but I was really upset that they had sent my sister home. But this was also on the tail end of a big process about how she had acted at my wedding, which was utter bullshit. So I always felt like there was this punishing undertone to the way that she was treated. And I don't know specifically if that was just part of the way that they created chaos in my family, or if it was another way to leverage trying to pull us apart, or if it was about the finances and trying to leverage that somehow. Like I said, this was an implicit thing. It was not explicit. It was just, there was obvious treatment that was different there with her. And so as soon as I got to the hospital, my birth did start progressing. And got there sometime in the morning. Ended up having my son by like around 8:30 that evening. Somewhere in there I did get some sleep. Not much though, because it was pretty active labor, and it went from 4 centimeters as soon as we had gotten to the hospital to fully dilated, pushed for about 30 minutes. There was some distress at the end. They had to do the little vacuum thing that they put on their head to help pull them out because they were worried about his heart tones. And maybe that was, one of the blessings of having to be there and having him at the hospital. But after I had them, because my birth had not gone the way that I had expected it, and because I had all these feelings of what was acceptable as far as having a birth, especially with my mom being a midwife, and especially with my sister of having had a baby at home, to me, I had felt like a failure. I went home with this beautiful baby boy and felt like a failure. And I know that there's a lot of confusing things that women go through after they have babies and all that kind of stuff. But there was this added layer of growing up in what we grew up in, and all these expectations about babies and birth and all this stuff. And this expectation around, what it meant to be a woman in the church. And they used to talk about different women all the time, and the babies they had at home. Like Marlo, one of her kids, she had a 12-pound baby at home. So it was like, it was always like bragging rights to be able to have had a baby at home. And some of it makes no sense too, because some of it was not the safe route to go. Generally they did follow, they followed what the mother felt comfortable with. It was usually based if the mother had had previous kids and they had had successful complication-free births. I mean, that's very much a rule of safely having babies at home and all of that kind of stuff. But there was, for me, it was all of the expectations that I didn't necessarily create around that situation and how I thought it was supposed to go. So it's not just this, and again, it's not just this experience of me deciding to have a baby and this thing between me and my husband. It's all this expectation in this huge group that's all incredibly intertwined. And the way in which we all live together, how we all do money together, how we all have businesses together, how we all go to church together, like it's all of those things. It's not just my little personal family. We are all 100% completely intertwined in every single way. And so it's not like our group was collectively tied in. We all lived in houses together. We all were, involved with each other on a day-to-day basis in a million different ways. So And after I had him, he was very healthy, um, very easy baby. Like, he was the kind of baby that he was just a very happy little baby. And, I did, and then we went home, and, that started kind of a different life. But I mean, I was kind of doing some of the same stuff anyways. So I'd gone from working at the school. So once I got really pregnant, I started working at the school, and I became a teacher at the school that we had, the charter school called the Shelby School. And then after I had my son, then I was immediately moved into babysitting. And so I became one of the babysitters. Somebody else took, it was just musical chairs of who was in what roles. And it was based on how little your kids were and what you could do. So I was probably babysitting within a week or two, because you didn't take any time off. Like, it's not like you could spend a month home with your baby. You were immediately thrown into a job of some kind. And if you had a small baby, then you had to be in a job that included that. So I go from teaching probably up till days before I had my son, because you weren't allowed to take time off. And then immediately I jump into the next thing, which is babysitting other children that are home so that other mothers can go work. They're either working at the Frozen Cow, which is the restaurant, or the law office, or they're sewing in the sweatshop, or they're one of the teachers and they're processing and doing those kinds of things. Like, everybody was a cog in the wheel. And so, and again, if it was a business that made money, it didn't mean that you got paid. It just meant that the money you made got thrown into the collective living situation so that the bills got paid. So, I think that's enough of the story for today. And we'll dive into a little bit more next week. I wanted to circle back today on the emotional stuff, and me getting really emotional last episode when I was talking about my wedding and I was talking about my baby shower. And I kind of want to talk about like what I do when I go through that kind of stuff, because we as people, when we've had trauma, it's not a, like, it's not a linear thing. You don't just come to it and then experience it and then it goes away and it never comes back again. It is like layers of the onion, and you are consistently like peeling away layers. And now there's a lot of things I can talk about and they don't bother me at all. Like, they don't make me emotional. They don't upset me. I can do it very freely, but there are other things that are very taxing. And if you've been through some type of emotional trauma, religious trauma, you can work really hard for a while. You could work with a therapist. You could do all different kinds of things to begin to work on that and still have it come up. Another part of it come up later that you will need to move through. So I want to talk about how I recommend doing that and maybe some tips and tricks for that. So when old trauma resurfaces, first rule on when old trauma resurfaces and you're re-experiencing it, the first thing I want you to understand is that you need to allow yourself to feel it. We get into our heads sometimes and we think to ourselves, well, geez, I can't believe it. And we start judging the emotion instead of just feeling the emotion. And you are doubling the amount that you have to deal with because you're judging, why am I going through this right now? Why did this come up for me? I can't believe I haven't gotten over this. Like, instead of just going, oh, okay, this is here again. And I need to allow myself the space, the time to feel this pain or this grief or this anger or whatever it is. Like, allow yourself to go through whatever emotion comes up for you. And it could be pain, it could be grief, it could be anger. Those are probably the ones I experience most often, is one of those three. And feel it. If you need to cry, have a cry. If you need to go for a walk to walk out your anger and frustration, that's fine too. If you need to, whatever feeling comes with that, just allow that. Understand that it is temporary. Like, sometimes we feel like when that feeling comes back, it's going to be around for longer than it is. When you let it just kind of flow over you, it goes away much more quickly. The problem is when you try not to allow it, that's when we tend to get stuck in those. The other thing is to acknowledge, how is it a gift? And I know it's hard to see that something that is really difficult could be a gift, but there's usually a gift that goes along with something. So for me, with last week specifically, I'll just share, like, I looked at the fact that I was experiencing how I had had my wants and needs taken away from me. I was not allowed to express my wants or my needs. And I was able to recognize how I still have difficulty with wanting things in my life, because when I was younger, wanting something became selfish, which isn't true. Wanting something is a very normal human need. Doesn't mean we always get it, but to want something is completely valid, and you should be allowed to want things. It's not selfish to want things, but I still experience some of that to this day, that wanting something could be a selfish thing. So you have to understand that it is okay to have wants and to have needs, and that when you are going through something and you're going through another layer of it, that is a gift for you. That is a gift for you to re-experience how something used to be, but you don't have to honor it anymore. Just because you went through something doesn't mean it has to be true anymore. So you were taught something, it might have been wrong. So then what are you going to do now? How do you get to re-experience it and know that it's okay to want and need things, or whatever it is that you're just that you're, whatever layer you're uncovering, right? And then I want people to understand too, if you're triggered about something, if something comes up and it triggers old stuff for you, it is not, don't get upset about the triggering. Realize that the triggering is letting you know that there is still another level to be healed. Because when you've healed something, it doesn't trigger you the same way. When you begin to move through something, then you realize, like, oh, okay, like, didn't even bother me anymore. Fine now. So if you're triggered about it, that's an indication that you still have unresolved feelings. And that's a gift. But if you sit in it, then you're reassaulting yourself when you don't have to. Having a negative emotion come up is a gift and a blessing, because it tells you you're somewhere you don't want to be. When you stay in that state and you don't move yourself out of it, emotionally, physically, or otherwise, then it's like putting your hand on a hot stove and deciding not to take your hand off the hot stove. You have control. You're an adult. Be responsible and do what you need to do to get to the other side of it. So, I hope that gave you some insight, and I hope that that was helpful. Coming here and doing this with you guys, I really do enjoy it. It can be taxing. Last week was taxing. I almost took an extra week. But I did what I needed to do to move through that, because I do find that this is also a way for me to heal what I've been through, and hopefully it helps you too. So look forward to seeing you guys next episode. Hope you have an amazing week, and thank you so much for coming. Again, I'm still trying to share this with more people. So if you could like, comment, share, 5-star reviews are amazing. I appreciate you, and have a great day.